Hi, I'm Mark Lynn, and I'm the Roommate Coach. You're listening to KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. My motto is World Peace, one roommate at a time. Today I'm going to be shifting gears a little bit and starting my role as the Roommate Coach, or I should say modifying my role to include reporting on things going on in the world. This is going to be episode 14 of the Roommate Coach, and I guess I'll call this one Multigenerational Roommates Part 1. I'm going to be discussing a really interesting article I spotted in the BBC, on bbc.com website. I'll get to that in just a minute, but just to continue the introduction here, if you want to leave any feedback for the Roommate Coach, you can do so at theroommatecoach.com. I will also have links there to things I discuss in the show. And you can also leave a voicemail 24/7 at 707-362-8000. That's 707-362-8000. The article I'm really excited about because I think it brings up a really good approach to a couple of roommate and housing issues that I've actually been discussing here. It's called One Solution to Two Big Social Problems. It's on the bbc.com website. It's very recent. The date on it is January 20, 2017. It's by Sam Bright, and it says BBC World Hacks. And I'm being careful to include attribution because I do want to quote from it, just a couple sentences. I'm pretty sure I can do that without any copyright problems. I know everyone's concerned about that kind of thing. But the lead, or I guess you'd call it the sub-headline, pretty much sums it up very nicely. And I'm quoting here from this article. Here's a solution that could tackle two of the West's most urgent problems: a young generation priced out of affordable housing and the loneliness and isolation of a rapidly aging population. End quote. What the article is discussing is something that apparently has been tried in this country as far back as the 1980s, according to the article. They're referencing an organization called HomeShare, which I'll probably discuss in future shows. But this particular article references an organization in France called Ensemble Two Generations. I would try to say it in French, but it would probably incite an international incident with my horrible French. The gist of it is the organization is bringing together young people who need to find affordable housing, students in some cases, but not necessarily, and older people who, the people involved in the article anyway, they have a home, but as we all know, especially here in Humboldt County, retirement community and nursing home issues, older people frequently face the problem of not being able to stay in their home because they're aging. So when I first read the article, I literally smacked myself in the forehead in the age-old gesture of, geez, why didn't I think of that? It just seems so obvious. And it's fascinating. It's a wonderful article. I will post links to it on the website and some related links as well. And it's given me quite a bit to think about and to discuss, because now I'm reading between the lines here. I don't really know the history of all this. This is something I will research more and include in future shows. But I have already begun to think of a few reasons why it might be tricky, even though the benefits are obvious. Everybody wins. The younger person, as you'll see if you go to the article and read some of the related stories, the young person gets a nice house to live in, and the older person has someone around for companionship and security, and in some cases sharing. There are different ways to set things up depending on what the individuals decide, but in some cases there is some expense sharing, and sometimes it's all agreement on the part of the young person to work. But it's just a fascinating idea. It seems brilliant. And the fact that it apparently has not been instituted on any grand scale in this country leads me, as the roommate coach, to suspect that as good as the idea is, there may be some bumps along the way in implementing it. So that's what I'm going to discuss starting in this show and possibly in future shows as well. And for that matter, just to tip my hand a little bit for future plans, I'm definitely going to be reaching out to people who are involved or who might be involved in this kind of a thing and interview them, because, as I say, the idea has been around for quite some time, and I definitely would like to get more input into the background. I might even have to brush up on my high school French and interview the people in France, although hopefully they speak English, because my high school French didn't get very far. The idea, the concept, is really simplicity itself. It's just one more application of computer matching. Classic example of that, of course, being the dating websites. Computer matching, in one way or another, has been around probably as long as computers have been around. But in this case, the matching involves two groups with clearly interlocking needs and capabilities. As I said, the young people who have all the strength and energy of a young person, but in many cases don't have a lot of assets yet, so they frequently need housing. And the older people, who in many cases have a home and frequently with room to spare, or at least a room to spare, but because they are getting older, they can use some help and would like some companionship, all the things that most of us are familiar with just from being alive and having our own families and everything, as well as our own experiences. So the concept is self-evident, and it has, in fact, been around for a while. Now, if I sound like I'm just new to all this, it's because I am. I didn't know that these particular organizations existed, although, as I say, the concept is about as obvious as anything could be. There's apparently an organization called homeshare.org, that I'm not clear at this point on the relationship between HomeShare and the French organization mentioned in the BBC article. That's something I hope to find out. So as far as the history of the idea, I'll again quote just a brief few sentences here from the same BBC article I mentioned earlier. Quote, "HomeShare is not a new idea. It was first trialed in the USA and Spain during the 1980s. However, experts have recently started to view it as a scalable solution to two problems that continue to cause social problems. While young people are migrating to cities, pushing up the price of rent, many populations in the developed world are aging." End quote. Now, those of us in Northern California who are usually familiar with San Francisco's, shall we say, housing plights, largely because of the tech boom, Google and Facebook and the techies, San Francisco has turned into almost a war zone between the young upwardly mobile who are pushing rents up to the sky, as the quote mentions here, and those who are finding it to be difficult, if not impossible, to afford. One more quote from the BBC article. Begin quote, "HomeShare schemes are now active in 16 countries across the world. Since 1999, an organization called HomeShare International has acted as a network for HomeShare schemes." End quote. Now, I've been reading several articles, interrelated articles here, in kind of a hurry, so I'm beginning to kind of lose track of what I saw where, but it seems like there was a comment that the home share concept is most active in the United States, and yet the implication that I'm getting from reading about this seems to be that it's caught on more quickly and is catching on more quickly in Europe. Now, I'm not sure about that. Something else I'll hope to find out more and report. But there is another interesting quote regarding the international aspect. I'll quote from the homeshare.org. The website's apparently, HomeShare, I guess, is as the other quote mentioned here, is the organization that has been pursuing this concept, as they say, in 16 countries since the 1980s. As far as the international aspect, the first article I mentioned here is on the BBC website from England, from the UK. The organization they quote is based in France. I think they're in Paris. And now here is a quote from the homeshare.org website on their FAQ page. And I'll quote a paragraph here. Begin quote, "Some other approaches. In Spain, home share programs are being run in universities where student accommodation is scarce. The underlying aims are to solve students' accommodation problems and to promote solidarity between the generations at the same time." End quote. Now, I thought that was interestingly put, the reference to the solidarity between the generations, which I think is a great idea. And one of many complaints I have about our society, the way we do things here, is we seem to differentiate, we seem to group ourselves according to age groups, and that does start out in the schools. And yet, seems pretty obvious when you think about it that the generations do have quite a bit to offer each other. So I thought that was an interesting quote, that they're specifically encouraging how did they put it? The solidarity between the generations is one of the goals of this shared housing project in Spain. You're listening to The Roommate Coach on KZCH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. This is episode 14 of The Roommate Coach. I'm calling this one Multigenerational Roommates Part 1. The motto here is World Peace, One Roommate at a Time. And for this episode, and presumably some of the future episodes dealing with this multi-generational concept, it's an especially apt motto because it appears that the idea of sharing rooms, sharing housing between younger people and older people is catching on more quickly overseas. The two countries specifically mentioned are France and Spain. But anyway, this is still the break, so I won't get back into the article until I finish things like reminding people of my contact information. You can leave feedback at theroommatecoach.com. There's a contact link on the homepage. And you can also leave voicemail feedback anytime, 24/7, at 707-362-8000. 707-362-8000. KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, fairly new radio station, has been brought to the air here in Humboldt County by Access Humboldt. You can reach Access Humboldt at accesshumboldt.net. Well, I have spent a little time looking online and getting a little more background on this home share concept. As I mentioned, to me it's new, although it's been around. The homeshare.org, which is apparently the parent agency in this country, that in the U.S., that matches or facilitates matches between older people wanting to share space in their home and younger people, wanting to live there in return for either work or reduced rent or some combination. There are various ways. The idea has been around, and it's been in this country. Home share apparently has been in place since the 80s. So what is happening with me is I'm responding to first of all, the fact that the whole thing is new to me. Now that I'm just one person, that might just mean that I have been living under a rock for 30 years, although that's not the case. I've been very interested in this type thing and have been involved as the roommate coach for about the last year and a half now. So it doesn't seem to be extremely well publicized. The other thing that I noticed in looking at the home share website and a number of the chapters, apparently they have chapters of home share in quite a few states, including quite a few in California. They don't have any local to Humboldt County, but they're in the big cities. And from what I could tell, and this is just based on a couple hours looking around, it seems like they're mainly aimed at the older folks who have room in their homes and want to get involved and make their home available to a younger person in return for, like I say, some help, companionship, some rent, whatever. The article in the BBC and the website in France, the organization in France that has been so successful, seems to pay much more attention, or they're promoting the idea from both directions, benefits to both parties, to the young person as well as the older person. So there seems to be a big difference in how the concept is presented, at least in the two countries. So again, going back to that quote about in Spain, the universities recommend it, and they're talking about the solidarity between the generations. Well, so far, from what I can tell, that doesn't seem to be the case. That kind of approach does not seem to be the case here in the States. So since the concept itself is so obvious and the potential benefits, and I emphasize potential because obviously there can be all kinds of things that keep the benefits from becoming a reality, but since the potential benefits are so obvious on both sides, I'm wondering why there isn't more emphasis placed on it, at least so far in this country. And I've come up with a few ideas. So what I'll do is I'll start with just a list of what I've come up with so far as possible reasons. And then for the rest of this show, I'll begin elaborating. Now, this will probably go on into another show. And again, as I mentioned, I intend to reach out to some of these folks that are involved in these agencies and see if I can get some interviews and get some more background and some more ideas. Ultimately, what I'm hoping to do, then maybe this is pie in the sky, time will tell. But since there is so much, the issue both for the older folks wanting to stay in their homes and the younger folks having harder and harder times finding affordable housing, that pertains right here in Humboldt County as well as the rest of the country as well as the rest of the world. So I would like to see more of this type of thinking become a little more, just a little more pronounced in this country. So that's my goal. I really want to promote as much mutual benefit from roommates working out as possible. So anyway, I'll get on with what I think are some of the reasons why the multi-generational idea seems to be a little bit slower to catch on in this country. So starting with probably the most obvious, the idea of younger folks, a younger person living with an older person. It's clearly not for everybody. Financial considerations notwithstanding, a lot of people just simply would prefer to live alone, even if every roommate in the world was an absolute angel, and that's personal preference. Now, that's perfectly reasonable. That makes sense to me, and I would hope it would make sense to everybody. And then going beyond that, but still within the same broad category, I'm sure there are plenty of young people that, for whatever reason, just would rather live with other young people. That's kind of a natural thing. It's not necessarily a product of some evil conditioning or anything else, although I'll probably have more to say about that possibility later on. And the same thing in the other direction. I imagine there are some folks, I've never raised children myself, but I certainly know plenty of people who have, and I know some people, in fact, I think my own mom said this at one point, but a lot of parents, once the kids leave home, they say, well, I'm glad to be done with that. I love them dearly, but I don't want any more kids. Some older folks just don't want younger people around, and that's personal preference as well. So that's got to be number one on the list. Is it's not for everybody, and why should it be? It wouldn't need to be. Now, the next item on my list as possible reasons why this type thing isn't catching on or hasn't caught on, apparently, as quickly here as it has elsewhere. And this is more into the roommate coach arena. This is one aspect that I would like to think that I'd be able to offer some suggestions and maybe some help with, is, once again, as we know, roommates don't always get along. I mean, if there was such a thing as Obvious Man, who gave prizes for people saying stupidly obvious things, that would be high on the list. And that fact of roommates giving each other a bad time, that is probably more of a concern when you're talking about different generations. And that easily segues into a couple other things on the list here, but just safety, I guess. I mean, if a couple of young folks of reasonable, similar size and strength and everything are living together and they get mad at each other, at least they can't intimidate each other. Now, clearly that's not always the case for any number of reasons, but it could be especially a concern with an older person who's probably not as strong and agile as the younger person, could easily be intimidated. So there's all kinds of, there would be any number of things that would have to be clearly established in terms of mutual safety and respect, and all the roommate issues would pertain, and in some cases would be magnified when you're talking about an older person and a younger person. So I could see that as a big reason why the concept hasn't caught on and doesn't seem to be as popularized so far. I say so far because I suspect that economic concerns may gradually change and the concept may become more popular. Okay, so that would be 2 items. I've got 5 items on my list. My first one was the concept isn't for everybody. The second one is the age-old issue of roommates getting along. Now, number 3 on my list, my so far list, again, this is based on just a relatively brief amount of time exploring the concept, but I've got number 3 is liability. And there's obviously all kinds of potential liability involved. If you're talking about an older person with a home and presumably all kinds of possessions and valuables beyond the home itself, and someone comes in the home and starts living there, and there's the potential for, you name it, everything from theft to injury to the homeowner. So all of that would clearly have to be dealt with. And now, this is pure speculation on my part. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert, but I think we all kind of know that the liability issue and lawsuits and just laws and legal complications beyond belief seems to have mushroomed in this country in the last generation or so. So it's quite possible that people contemplating this type thing are just scared away at the thought of liability. I suspect I might be. So that's number 3 on the list as possible reasons, is the big liability issue. Now, number 4, this is where I draw on my own background as someone from a contentious family that helps me think of weird things like this, maybe not so weird, is that I'm calling it family rivalries. Now, it could be that I've watched too many daytime TV dramas and stuff like that, but I'm envisioning a situation where, let's say, grandma's got a big old house and the kids all live far away, and they don't have all the time in the world to go visit Granny, but they're certainly aware of her house and perhaps whatever else she has of value. Well, along comes the roommate who lives with Granny and becomes a very near and dear friend. And at some point, Granny starts thinking about, well, maybe I should leave some of this to Susie, or whatever the roommate's name is, with a little bit less available for the kids. And you could see where that could go. Now, I'm just speculating, but this type of thing certainly happens. I mean, gosh, there was that famous case. Geez, I think it's probably number of years ago now. I can't remember the woman's name. A younger woman, blonde woman. It was in all the TV shows. The name will come to me at some point. It was probably about 8 or 9 or 10 years ago now, I think. But she lived with a much older gentleman who was a multi-millionaire, or had lots and lots of money. It seems like his wealth was at least in the hundreds of millions. So he wound up leaving it to her rather than the family. And the family was rightly, I don't know if I would say rightly, but the family was understandably less than thrilled about this. So not hard to imagine this type thing showing up as some kind of a problem. Now, in my next show, I intend to elaborate on these, and I could see where it could actually work in the other direction, but I'll get to that when I elaborate. For now, I'm just summarizing. Now, number 5, and this is pure speculation on my part, but again, based on quite a few decades of living in our world and knowing that, as Tom Cruise said at one time, follow the money. I noticed specifically the article I quoted about Spain, where they said in Spain the universities encourage this type of thing. Well, the universities here, at least from what I've seen, I've not seen any reference to this. And I have looked at a number of university websites specifically in the housing section because of my roommate coach doing research and background and stuff. And again, this is just a personal thought, and it might indicate my cynicism, which I will admit to, but I think that's understandable as well. So what I'm getting at is, if however many students decide to go and live with an older person in town rather than write big checks to the university for living in the dorm, well, there's a transfer of resources, and it might not be overly cynical to suggest that sometimes things are emphasized or de-emphasized based on where the money is likely to go. So that's number 5, and that's all for my short list so far. I will elaborate on those in my next show or in future shows. And that will be it for this episode 14, the initial episode in what I'm calling multigenerational roommates. I'll call this one part 1. My name's Mark Lynn. I'm the roommate coach, and this is KZZH 96.7 FM in Eureka, California. KZZH has been brought to the air by Access Humboldt. You can reach them at accesshumboldt.net. The bumper music is called Rollin' at 5, and I will probably stick with it for the time being. I kind of like it, and if I start getting complaints about my bumper music, I would change it, but for now I intend to stick with it. It's Rollin' at 5, and it's by Kevin MacLeod. You could leave feedback for the roommate coach, that's me, at theroommatecoach.com. That's the website. You can leave it online. See, there is a contact link on the homepage. And you could also leave a voicemail anytime at area 707-362-8000. 707-362-8000. Again, this has been episode 14 of The Roommate Coach. If you do leave feedback, and you can leave the episode number you're referring to, if you're referring to a specific show, that would help. But anyway, I'm enjoying talking about multi-generational roommates. I intend to do more of it because I think it's an exciting concept. I hope you're finding it enjoyable as well, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon.